Hello and good morning or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We'd like to welcome you most wholeheartedly to the Consortium of Universities for Global Health, our session on children in war, where we're going to be exploring lessons and stories from speakers from around the globe focused on what is happening in the world with respect to children in war. Um, so, regardless of where you're joining us from, and your field of work, we are thrilled that you are here to partake in this discussion. The motivation for this work and this panel today, is essentially that we are facing unprecedented levels of violence, unlike anything that we've seen since the end of the Second World War. And beyond the civilian harm that is happening around the globe, the majority of the harm that is happening, regardless of where you are or what conflict you're focused on, is on children. And so, like, as we begin to think together and listen to these speakers, one of the things that I'd like to draw our attention to is that we are moving into more and more global conflict, as we are all aware. And as recently as a week ago, the highest ranking general of the French army, said that the mothers of France should prepare to lose their children in reference to the potential expansion of Russian aggression, resulting in potential that NATO countries need to respond in war, which turned my entire body to goosebumps, because we are not only facing conflicts in Gaza, in between Russia and Ukraine, and as our panelists in this first section will speak to, across Africa. Um, and the second thing that I wanted to share with you, a thought, is that war is a disease. And as I was reflecting on this panel and beginning to speak with the panelists and think about how we wanted to shape this session, one of the things that occurred to me is symbols of healing. And I wanted to show you, since I'm not using slides in my opening remarks, this symbol from the crest of the Stanford School of Medicine. And on this part of the crest, you see the staff of Asclepius. And so this is a symbol of healing. Asclepius was a Roman god who had a stick that he would use to cut the patient, to pull the worm out of the patient to save their life. And I think that as I've been reflecting on what this session can do, is that the panelists who are here today and you who are joining us online or listening to this later all have a role to play in tacking the world away from war towards a more peaceful future for humanity that's primarily focused on children. And with that, I would like to welcome to the floor Caitlin Howarth. Caitlin is the director of Yale's Humanitarian Research Lab, which is one of the preeminent forces tracking conflict around the globe, focused most closely recently on Ukraine and what's happening with the kidnapping and deportation of children out of Ukraine into Russia. But her group is also focused on Sudan. And with that, Caitlin, I'd like to welcome you. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you so much. It's really a real honor to be among such a distinguished group of colleagues here today. The work that our team has been doing, and I'll focus mainly on Ukraine, but I'll touch a little bit on the situation in Sudan as well. I know that there's many who are going to be able to speak across these conflicts. Um, our team has been documenting the situation with Ukraine's children since 2022. And in that context, it's important to keep in mind that there are any number of ways in which Ukraine's children have been deeply impacted by this conflict. Our team has been focused primarily on the forcible transfer, the indoctrination, militarization, and other ways in which Russia is attempting to essentially Russify Ukraine's children through any means possible. So in that way, we focus on four groups of children. There are those who are taken along the front lines of the war. These are children who we've seen sometimes taken after their families have been killed. Um, there are those who are, and then the children are effectively captured by Russian forces. There are children who are taken through essentially a ruse, and it's a mix. It's often a very muddled situation where, in the context of the front lines, there are these camps that are offered as a rest opportunity, places where children can get away from the front line, from the stress, and from the privations of war, where it's hard to get access to fresh food, just to opportunities to play, just to be children. Um, and so Russia has set up these camps further away in occupied Crimea and elsewhere. And children are offered the opportunity to go and stay there, usually for up to 2 weeks at a time. And earlier in the conflict, it was clearly established that they would be able to come back from these camps. Now, when children are sent there by their parents, uh, in many, many cases, we've documented that these children subsequently do not come back, and that their children's whereabouts, their well-being, and any circumstances of their location, their health, and their status is then withheld from their families, and the children are subsequently told that their families no longer want them, that they will not come get them, and that they're essentially forsaken. Um, which is those are some of the most psychologically distressing situations that you can put a child into, tell them that their family has given them up. A third group are children that are in institutions. These are some of them are orphans and no longer have family. Many of them do actually have family, and they are in state-run institutions, either because they have severe disabilities, they may have intellectual disabilities, and some are simply there for temporary care while their family are going through struggles of their own. But these children have often been targeted by Russian state actors and occupied government actors, and then taken from those locations, moved through Ukraine into Russia, and then listed subsequently for adoption or fostering in Russia. And we've seen cases where there have been opportunities for their names to be changed, for them to be taken through and like given Russian passports, essentially for their identities to be changed. Um, and then the last group that we're really concerned about, because this is where the numbers grow exponentially, are children who are pushed essentially in just one direction through the course of the war, through the filtration processes. These are centers that are set up along border regions where families are given only one option, which is in order uh, to escape the front lines, they're told you can evacuate, but only in one direction. You can go east into Russia itself. And in the filtration centers, we've already documented in previous reports that men of military age are systematically separated from their families. We are now also able to see that there are cases where women and their children are also separated from each other, and the children may be then taken into Russia's overall system of forcible transfer. So, in all of these cases, and this is where we're seeing the potential for the numbers to truly skyrocket. So, we've documented at least our rough numbers that we're putting it at go up to about 19,000 that we've stated. Our upper estimate is at 35,000 that we believe is sort of like the upper end of number of children that we're tracking. And we're actively working right now on continuing to update those figures in our overall caseload. But the true number is probably in the hundreds of thousands simply because of the scale of those filtration operations. We're talking about a population of over 1.6 million children that are within the temporary occupied territories of Ukraine to begin with at the outset of the full-scale invasion. And Russia, by its own accounts, has said that they have 700,000 Ukrainian children within its borders. So, with that, to keep that in mind, um, that's sort of the scope of what we're seeing. And these are children who are then systematically put through indoctrination programs at every step, whether they're in the occupied territory, whether they're then in camps, or in institutions within Russia, or in schools, cadet programs, military camps within Russia. And so this is essentially a one-way pipeline that Russia is trying to take Ukraine's children, and not only turn them against their own country, but to actually feed them back to the front line itself, and to put them back to work in the war against their homeland. With that, I'll hand it back over to you, Ruth.
Thank you, Caitlin. And one thing I wanted to note for those listening online is that as you read the news and read about peace agreements, the all for all prisoner exchange that will hopefully eventually happen, essentially the arguments that Putin will make is that the children that have been taken are now Russian because he has a demographic problem. But the work that Caitlin's group and the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab is doing, they are tracking these children to understand where they've gone so that when we do eventually get to peace, that these children can be returned. So, Caitlin, it's nothing short of remarkable the work that you and your colleagues at Yale are doing, including those that are working in the backdrop to make this happen in Ukraine and elsewhere. So, thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Tunde, who's a friend and a remarkable pediatrician from Nigeria. He is based at the University of Ibadan. We've gotten to know each other quite well over the last couple of months as I've learned more about the complexities of delivering pediatric care in northern Nigeria. And Dr. Tunde, we are absolutely thrilled to have you here. And we look forward to hearing what you have to share with us today.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ruth Gibson, for that most kind introduction and for inviting me to join this panel and discuss this most important topic today. I'll be sharing with you this afternoon a perspective and experience from Nigeria, which is fragmented though, but I'm sure you'll be able to relate with some of the things we'll be sharing. I'll just share a little slide presentation that I just put together. Can you see my screen, please?
Yes, we can if you want to put it in presentation mode.
All right, good. So we're talking about children in war zones. Nigeria is not at war, but our situation is probably worse or pretty much the same as kids at war. And like Ruth said earlier, I work as a pediatrician in Ibadan. Ibadan is like 150 kilometers thereabout up north of Nigeria, up north of Lagos. And our own concerns has really got to do with terrorism and the offshoot of poor management of terrorism, in my own opinion, and how it has affected children. And we'll be looking at how we all can come together to improve the plight of these children. So the picture that you see is what typifies the northeastern part of Nigeria, where the Boko Haram team have been in operation since 2009. But as I'll go on in the presentation, you'll find out that the terror that they've unleashed on the country and the people has gone beyond them, but other groups have been emboldened because of the way they've been handled in our part of the world. I don't have any disclosure or conflict of interest as I give this talk. And that's a short or brief outline of my discussion. So let me start with a story that is online and we can all look it up, and there are many like this. And I give this story because a friend of mine says at times it's better to tell a story to drive your points home. And this is a story I came across a woman in part of the troubled areas of Nigeria. And our account was the usual pattern. They come in the night, they set the village ablaze, they separate the men, they kill them. And when they kill them, they don't kill them with gun or bullets or stuff. They actually slaughter them to make the death, and they make their families watch them to make it more gruesome. Worse still, they abused the woman. And in this case, this was like a 12, 13-year-old girl that was raped next to her father's corpse, and her mom was forced to watch. And every time she looked away, she was slapped and told to look at it to see what the child was going through by the bandits. And after that, the girl was not herself again. Well, this is one of the many, 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 many stories that happen every day in our country in areas that are troubled by the Boko Haram insurgency, and other bandits have come to the fore and are worsening the plight of our children. Now, Boko Haram, I term it terrorism unusual. And what does it mean? For some of us that might not know, Boko means anything education, westernization, anything that's got to do with the West. And Haram pretty much means forbidding anything, anything that's an abomination, so to speak. So you have a group that have come to the fore, and they're rooted in an ideology that is basically hatred for anything Western. So that's what the local guys call them, because that's the way they've come across to the local guys. But the name actually says they're people committed to the propagation of the Prophet's teaching and jihad. Jihad, by the way, means forceful conversion to their religion. And this started in 2009, and it's fostered on till we speak. In the last 1, 2 months after President Trump declared Nigeria as a country of particular concern, there's been a remarkable upsurge of brazen kidnapping of droves, dozens of people, and it's been like that, you know. Now, what have they done? Basically, what they've done to press home the demands and what they stand for is to destroy anything that has to do with government. Schools in areas that they stay have been destroyed. Health facilities in the thousands have been destroyed. Government offices and establishments also destroyed in all those places. In some places, they've actually set up their own local government, or caliphates, they call them. But along with that has gone the destruction of other ideologies or beliefs that are contrary to theirs. So Christians have come under very vicious attack. They killed in broad daylight their houses, their farms, their businesses, churches, their properties, anything that's got to do with Christians are destroyed in those areas where they control. As a collateral damage, the Muslims have come under attack recently because some of them have spoken up against what these guys are doing. So that's the kind of mayhem that is going on in that part of the country. Now, what has happened as a consequence of the assault? So there's been an assault on systems and structures. So like I mentioned earlier, schools and educational institutions have been destroyed. Health facilities have routine immunization and basic healthcare have been destroyed in most of those areas. Most of these communities are attacked are largely agrarian, and they depend on their livestock or their farm. Now they've lost those farms and their means of livelihood, so you can imagine the amount of poverty. And of course, with that, there's been a large number of internally displaced people. We're looking at close to about 3 million at the last count, which figures might be an underestimation. Now, on the human part of it, what has been the effect on human beings? So there's been killing of citizens. Most affected have been women and children. Of course, the men too have been affected as well. There's been targeted killing of health workers. They actually at the time went after health workers and were killing health workers. And the result of that was abandonment of duty post or migration of health workers out of those troubled areas. Of course, with all of this has been very bad levels of malnutrition. In Nigeria, between 45 to 50% of the population have underlying malnutrition in children less than 5. With all that I've talked about, you can imagine how that has skyrocketed. There's been an increase in communicable diseases and infectious diseases from poor sanitation, overcrowding, poor access to immunization or health facilities. The mental health issues has been astronomical. The sad part of all this terrorist attack in Nigeria is that because those areas are not accessible, it's been difficult to really assess the impact of the damage. Of course, there's been a lot of abuse, drug abuse, sex abuse, and all of that. There have also been children conscripted into these groups by force and also by the civilian joint attacks, they call them. These are civilian groups that have come to organize themselves to kind of respond to all these attacks to the villages. And on both sides, they've actually conscripted children, underage children, to fight at the forefront and use them at times even as human shields or bombs to put forward their agenda and what they're doing. So there's also been a deliberate dehumanization and psychological trauma to all the people affected in these areas, because that probably leaves a more lasting damage to the psyche and the person than even the physical trauma. And I talked earlier about the physical, sexual abuse and emotional abuse that goes on in all those places. So this just shows a map of Nigeria, and it shows the hotspots. Those are the parts in red, and then the cold spots. And if you look at this, it tells us that the crisis is not just in one region. Yes, the hotspots are in the northeast where it all started from, but they actually have splinter groups and autonomous cells that operate in almost any part of the country, pretty much. So it's been a really bad situation for the country. Now, I talk also about the amorphism of the terrorism in Nigeria. And how do I mean? So it all started with Boko Haram, but then there's been a metamorphosis, so to speak, of all sorts of groups. So there are those that are Boko Haram, there are those that are affiliates of ISO, that's Islamic State of West African Province, that have linkages with those in the Sahel and the ISIS group and all of that. Then there are also bandits that have taken on the loose where the government has handled all of this to also perpetrate their own trade, so to speak. Unknown gunmen, they call them, but there are lots of talks about these unknown gunmen being used by politicians to cause destabilization and get one or two political gains. Then there are also separatist militant groups that go into conflict with their parent bodies and begin to operate autonomously. And then there are kidnapping networks, because it has become a very veritable source of income for these people and for criminals that want to latch on the current chaos that is ongoing. Now, the other problem with this issue that we have, it's very, the motives are fluid. There are all sorts of reasons. You have religious extremism, you have political violence, ethno-communal conflicts, economic desperation, local grievances, and all of this even makes it more complex to address. Then lastly is the changing nature of the pattern in which they engage. So you have some that have been split into factions. You have some autonomous cells that are operating for whatever reason. You have mergers and regrouping for opportunistic alliances or to reinforce territories. They hang on territories. And then there are also freelance actors, and then they kind of develop shifting methods to perpetrate the mayhem on the populace. And what still is the fact that there's some evidence and concerns that local collaborators within the communities that are affected and also amongst government functionaries. In the last 1 month, there's been the news of an army general, brigadier general, that was ambushed. And he got out of the initial ambush and sent his location using WhatsApp to security forces. I told them how to come get him out. And that information got into the hand of the bandits, and they came after him and shot him. They took the videos and all of that. That goes again to reinforce the fact that they're actually people that are collaborating with these bandits within our security agencies. Now, specific impact on children, you would imagine the amount of malnutrition that's going on in those places. Lots of children are out of school, sexual abuse. Sexual abuse comes in different forms. Rape is one of it. Forced marriage is another one, because the bandits are promised that if they can do what they've been asked to do and kill innocent people. They get to receive these wives as these young girls as a reward. Some of the girls are actually taken along and used as sex slaves. Some are used to trade-offs and cut deals with other partners that are working with them in all those areas. I've talked earlier about child soldiers. Infectious diseases, we don't know the magnitude of the outbreak of infections in those settings, but there's been reports of measles. I'm going to show some slides of the diphtheria outbreak in Nigeria that is ravaging the country and has lingered on since 2022. And that really speaks to the decimation of our immunization system from COVID and all of that's happening in the Northeast and northern part of the country. With all of this, you would imagine that we're stunting and poor nutrition and all the children are going through. There's a direct assault on their development, and that ultimately impacts on their ability to achieve their full life potential. And these have long-term consequences on these children and the communities. Of course, there's been a massive increase in mental health issues, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorders, substance abuse. Some of this is deliberate to make the children do the biddings of their captors, and then basically lost childhood. Now, this slide just wants to show you what's happening with respect to vaccine preventable diseases. So the first slide on the top is a study that looked at the Nigeria Indicator and AIDS survey, and they took samples and did analysis of some vaccine antigens to see the levels of protection. And you can see that in the northern part of the country, right from 0 years to 14 years, they carry the highest brunt of low protection, right, for tetanus. And tetanus is a good marker of having had contact with some form of immunization. And then lower down is the epidemic curve for diphtheria that's been going on since 2022. Diphtheria, by the way, it's a vaccine preventable disease with a very potent and efficient vaccine. But this map just tells us that there's been underlying disruption of the immunization system and is right across the whole country. 36 states of the country have reported cases, and as I speak, there's still ongoing reports of these cases. There's been high mortality. More than half of them are actually confirmed cases, which, though most of them are clinically confirmed, but you will understand that because of the lack of diagnostic platforms, there's a limitation to how much can be actually confirmed in the lab. Majority of the cases have been in children, and mortality is pretty high. For malnutrition, to assess the magnitude of malnutrition in those communities has been a challenge. But background data suggests that up to 2 million or more of Nigerian children have severe acute malnutrition, and just about a fifth of them have access to the treatment that they need. We have a population of IDPs of 3 million, probably more than that, and there are all various forms of malnutrition going on in those camps. Some studies comparing children from IDPs and their native host countries has shown that there's like 57% increase in the likelihood of severe acute malnutrition amongst those that come from those the displaced population and the home population. That's just like a proxy to tell you the magnitude of malnutrition going on in those settings. Now, what are the interventions that are needed? First, for me, I think there's a need to halt the onslaught. It's gone on for too much and for too long. I grew up in the northern part of the country, and from way back in the 70s, the 80s, we've had similar snippets of this kind of activities that we see. And unfortunately, to date, very few, if anybody, has been held responsible. And I think that's one big intervention that we need to push for. So in the last 2-3 weeks, with the designation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern, the government has been frantically making changes in its security architecture, in their number of the ambassadors and their foreign embassies and all of that, to try and make a change, a difference, which I think is rather late. Yes, it's better late than never, but it had to take that push for us to begin to see changes, right? And the kids really need us to help them stop that. So I think that's one of the main things that we need to do. I don't know how we're going to do that, but that's urgently needed. There's a need for education because many demographic health surveys and all the surveys have shown that underlying child health indices is maternal education. And one of the big onslaughts of the Boko Haram groups has been to prevent women from having access to education. And that's a big, big problem for me. Of course, we also need to talk about nutrition, right? And nobody says those kids don't want to go to school. We've had records of just recently this year, 3 kids from that part of the country actually got a global award on an English competition in the UK. That's to tell you the potential out there if they're just given the opportunity to express themselves. Nutrition, there's a need for nutrition, health facilities, there's a need for housing. I'm being mindful of my time, sorry. There's a need for livelihoods. A lot of the people in those places have lost their livelihoods. They can't farm, which is what most of them do. Many odd jobs in the cities they can't do because of all the insecurity in those places. And there's definitely a need for rehabilitation, both physical and psychosocial rehabilitation. And I'll just go briefly into pathways that I think we can engage as a people, as a community. And again, thank Dr. Ruth Gibson and her team for putting a spotlight on this condition. And that's because I believe that people are really keen and honest about wanting to do something. And I think that's very important. So do we need aid to help us resolve this? I've put aid and I've struck it out because I don't believe aid is a solution. Again, I don't think aid is a solution. Again, I don't think aid is a solution. Yes, there's a need for funding. Nigeria is not a poor country. If we prioritize the resources that we have and do the needful, I think that's the way to go. And that's why I want to ask that we demand accountability. I'm going to go into greater detail about that. And then we need also partnerships. We need partnerships like this to talk about these things, to look at them in a more holistic way and more scientific evaluation of the problem and how to resolve them. I think that's the way to go if you ask me. Now, what do I mean by accountability? The fact that this problem has gone the way it has gone for so long, and it has even evolved into a hydra-headed problem, it just speaks to the complicity of governments and places where this conflict exists. Just this week, Nigeria, for the first time since the onslaught of Boko Haram, released the list of funders and companies that fund Boko Haram, and you wonder that why did it take them so long to do that? There's a circulating clip on the internet. You could look it up. A sitting senator in the last regime is also in this regime on the floor of Nigerian Senate said he gave the president information about retired army generals using the bandits as a shield to mine solid minerals illegally in the country, and they bring in helicopters for supplies and take it out, and nothing happened. As I speak, nothing has happened against such a grave allegation, public allegation, in the seats in the Senate chamber of Nigeria. So a lot of people in Nigeria believe that there's complicity of government and government agencies in the continuation of this onslaught on the country and on our children. So we need to demand accountability from our government. We need our government to prioritize human development indices. I'm a Nigerian, and it breaks my heart when they talk about all the evils and the bad things that bedevils our country. We just got out of a 1-month strike of resident doctors shutting out health institutions, public health institutions all across the country. It speaks to the government failing to prioritize the things they need to prioritize. I grew up in the North. I went to university in the North. That's 30, 40 years ago, thereabout. And I've always known people in the North being offered scholarships for education, but it still remains the most backward part of the country when it comes to education. And I think that's because the leaders in that part of the country have not really done the needful to take the people out of poverty by providing them the kind of education and enlightenment that they need. And this is worsening again now with the Boko Haram and all the bandits and all the issues that we have. It's been a common pattern to attack educational institutions and take children out in their hundreds. We had the example of the Chibok girls. The Chibok girls is over 10 years now. Some of those children, those girls have never been returned or united to their families. You know, our government needs to look into wealth creation for our people. Nigeria has fertile, arable lands. We have brilliant people that are ready to work, but we need the government to put structures in place to make them contribute to the country and to development. Women empowerment. I'm a pediatrician. I've seen it over and over again that for you to change child health indices, you need to empower our women. We need to give them the right of place and make them do the needful that they ought to do to take care of the children and contribute to nation building. And then we need our governments to be transparent, the actions to be equitable, and the interventions to be accountable. There's been all sorts of corruption and issues around corruption and poor management of all the crises that we have, even in trying to address what the Boko Haram and the other groups have unleashed upon the country. We need partnerships, and I think that's the way to go. We need partnerships to empower our women. How best can we empower women in settings like this in Nigeria? What kind of empowerment is fit for their own locale, right? What are the resources available that can be leveraged to empower these women to be self-sustaining, which is what every woman in that part of the country that I've come to interact with really wants. We need adaptive educational programs. So what has happened there means that the kind of educational interventions we're going to give is not going to be the routine or the regular kind of educational activities. There has to be educational activities for children, for adults that have lost out on the education that they ought to have had, educational activities for people that are migratory or nomadics, educational activities that will include other psychosocial needs of these children. Some of these children have physical disabilities. They've lost an arm, an eye, a leg, a limb. All those things need to be incorporated. Educational activities that takes the community along to define what they want for themselves and bringing on board religious and cultural leaders to have a role in whatever we fashion out for these children. Educational activities to help them stay in school and not live in the fear of the next gunshot or the next kidnap out of those school settings, right? So it has to be a custom-made educational activity for them. We need to work on health-seeking behaviors. Background in Nigeria, we have challenges with health indices because of education and the impact that has on health-seeking behaviors. What models can we develop to improve health access and equity in these places that are ravaged by conflict in our country? Right. How best can we use the resources and the funds available to meet their health needs? How can we improve the uptake of maternal, newborn, and child health services? There's a place of culture, there's a place of religion, and there's a background history that pervades this part of the country. How can we improve on those innate challenges that we have now worsened by this crisis that we're going through? Those are things that we need partners and collaborators to come help think through and adapt something that works for us. What kind of health creation is important for that setting? I've talked about the fact that most of the people in these areas are agrarian in nature. Can we unlock the agricultural value chain to create value for the people in those places? It's not money alone that will do that. It takes a lot of science and innovative thinking and working with the people on ground. We need to rehabilitate. We need to reintegrate. The populations have been decimated by this crisis have lasted for almost 20 years or more going. So what rehabilitation measures do we need to put in place and how do we go about it? So I think what we need at this stage from all of us and all of you on this call is partnership on how to walk through this together with us. Is there hope? That's what I see in this young man asking. Is there hope? It depends on me, depends on you, depends on all of us. And I believe that's why we're here this afternoon. And I hope that this meeting today is going to bring something beneficial to a lot of children hanging on and hoping that sooner than later, hope will come for them. Those are my few references, and I thank you for listening. Thank you, over.